Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Hrg, and today we're going to be taking a look at Killing Floor 2's Firebug. We're going to be discussing, is it a good class for beginner, what makes it strong, and going over a couple builds and a couple loadouts that you can use with the class. So, let's talk about the Firebug's passives first of all. So, the Firebug gets passive perk weapon damage, 0.8% per level. This is pretty standard. Most classes get an increase in damage with their perk weapons. Firebug is a little bit lower than normal, but that's alright. You still get damage. They also get passive reload speed, 0.8% per level. Reload speed is great. A lot of Firebug's weapons do take a little while to reload, so having that extra reload speed really does make a difference as you level up. You get resistance to Z fire damage, 30% to start out with, and then 2% every single level. This makes you very resistant, especially towards husks, as well as a couple other damages like the Matriarch's plasma shot counts as fire damage, and a couple other ones. You also have immunity to your own fire, 25% to start, going up by 3% per level. At max, this is 100% immunity to your own fire. Max level Firebug is a bit different than lower level Firebug, and I will be explaining that. Mostly it has to do with just throwing Molotovs at your feet. You don't have to worry about it once you're max level compared to early levels. And then you also get bonus starting ammo, 10% every 5 levels. This is also quite useful. This just makes it so your early game is that much stronger, and Firebug really excels at the early game. So let's talk about the first build. Now, the first build is a pretty straightforward Firebug build, and it can honestly work with pretty much any other weapons. So level 5, we're going with high-capacity fuel tanks. This gives us all of our fuel tanks and magazines of perk weapons 100% more ammo. This is really, really strong. This is one of the best perk in terms of ammo capacity for any of your magazines. So that's great. We're going to go with ground fire. This makes it so your ground fires do 3 times more damage, as well as reduce Z movement speed by 30%. This is very useful and a really strong ability with a lot of your weapons. It doesn't work with all of your weapons, but it will work with the weapons recommended in this build. And then we go with Z shrapnel. This makes it so every time you kill a Z with your fire, there is a 30% chance that it will explode, dealing damage to everything around it, as well as having a very high stun chance. This one is also an extremely strong ability. After this, if we were going to go down to level 20 and level 25, I would recommend Heatwave. This is a very strong perk as well. This just pushes everything away from you at point blank range, and point blank range doesn't necessarily mean they are directly at your the muzzle of your gun, because weapons like the Flamethrower and microwave gun count as being point blank range for their entire length of their flame or laser microwave stream, whatever you want to call it. So very strong ability. And then at level 25, it's really your choice between Pyromaniac and Inferno. With this build, I would probably say Inferno's better, at least with the loadout that we're going to be looking at, but Pyromaniac is very strong too. Alright, let's talk about the Firebug starting equipment. So your starting equipment is the Cock and Burn. Your starting weapon is the Cock and Burn. This is a very unique weapon because you can't actually find this weapon laying on the ground on most maps. Again, custom maps are a bit different. It's a miniature flamethrower that has a somewhat short reach overall. As you can see, it also has at least with this build, has a 100 round capacity in its magazine, although normally it would only hold 50. This weapon is a pretty straightforward weapon and great for beginners because you don't really need to aim. Just hold down the trigger and spit out some flame. There's a couple ways you can do this, at least, you know, how to ration out your fuel a bit better. I find it's better to spray a decent line like that rather than just try to, you know, tap fire the flame. If you tap fire the flame, it is not as ammo efficient as you would think, because every time you tap fire, it's guaranteed to take out, I believe, 4 fuel. So I find just holding it down a little bit longer, a little bit more useful. And then just mostly just try to burn at Z speed. That's all you really want to do. It's also very strong against bloats. Bloats do not like fire at all. They die very quickly to it. Same with all of the little Zeds, die very fast to the fire as well. So I'd recommend just keeping the Cock and Burn for a couple waves. You can buy ammo for it if you need to. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it. Ammo pickup for this weapon is not that great. It's actually much less than a lot of other weapons. You don't get an entire clip. You only get 50 fuel in total. So, well, you only get half a clip, sorry, I should say. You get 50 fuel with this build, you get 25 with just the standard 50 rounds that it would normally hold. This weapon also does not scale very well. It's really not worth putting any upgrades into the cock and burn whatsoever, because its scaling is just so low. The cock and burn does not do very much damage, at least directly. It's mostly through its ground fire and through just the damage over time effect of the fire where it gets all of its damage from. Or at least the majority of its damage from. Alright, you also, just like every other class, have a 9mm and a knife. You'll pretty much only use these if you're completely out of ammo with all your other weapons. Firebug doesn't really get any bonuses for using these. And your cock and burn, as well as pretty much all of your early weapons, tier 2, tier 3 weapons, can absolutely destroy bloats, rioters, sirens, really anything that's like a small or a medium Zed. Firebug is incredibly good at killing small Zeds and medium Zeds. They're also pretty good against husks. You don't have to worry about husks as much. They can still blow you up. So be a little bit wary of getting close to them. However, if a husk starts using its flamethrower on you, or even hits you with its direct hit, you really don't have to worry about it. Firebug can kind of just shrug it off with their passive fire resist, so that's pretty nice. All of your weapons also are pretty good against robots, oddly enough. You wouldn't think a robot would be all that flammable, but they have a high chance of freaking out while they're on fire, so they're less likely to use any of their abilities. So the first weapon I would recommend with this build is the Flamethrower. This is just the upgrade of the Cock and Bird. Once again, the Flamethrower is very similar to the Cock and Bird. It doesn't need upgrades. I would actually recommend against upgrading it. If you don't have any, thing else that you could upgrade though, it's not a bad weapon to upgrade. This holds 100 rounds of fuel in it normally, 200 with this build. And you use the exact same strategy with this as you do with the Cock and Burn. This is just the upgrade in my opinion, and you really don't need to buy this thing immediately. Firebug is a class that can get away with just using their starting weapon for a very long time, usually about halfway through the round, until big things start showing up, and then the Cock and Burn isn't as good, but it's still decently strong, in all honesty. Just like every other class, you should probably be looking around for low-level weapons that you can find on the ground. You can sell these for bonus cash, or you can use them to get you through the early waves. So, the Flamethrower, like I said, you're going to use it the exact same way you use the Cock and Burn. This has a little bit longer range. It does a bit more damage. It's a bit better at hitting the ground fires. And it's just a great weapon overall. It's amazing for killing any sort of small Zed and medium Zed. Also, with the fire of any Firebug weapon, if you hit a Stalker with it, they can no longer cloak. So that is pretty strong. If you light them on fire, well, and, don't kill them like I did, their skin will be burnt and they can't cloak anymore, so they can't really sneak up on your back line as easily. People like the Sharpshooter or Demo can see them much easier, so they don't have to worry about them getting close. Firebug can actually be an amazing support class for the team when used correctly. Firebug does have kind of a learning curve, at least when getting better with Firebug. Firebug is incredibly easy to just pick up and use though, simply because almost all of their weapons don't require very much aim. The second weapon I'd recommend for this loadout could either be the Dual Spitfires or the Dragon's Breath, both of which are pretty great. Dual Spitfires are better for dealing even more damage and having some range so that you can deal just more damage over time to a lot of small things. Dragon's Breath is great if you want to do single target damage, although it can also have some range and deal some damage out there. As stated in all of my other beginner videos, this is going to only go up to tier 3 weapons. Nothing above that. So no tier 4 weapons. No, we're not going to be talking about the microwave gun or the husk cannon in this video. They're both fantastic weapons. But we're just simply not going to look at them this time. The beginner list is specifically made for people that might have trouble, staying alive, getting enough money to really buy the weapons that they need. These weapons are very cheap, and they're very strong. The Spitfires do benefit from hitting things directly, although it's not entirely necessary. Simply firing at the ground in front of enemies, or just anywhere where enemies are going to come, works really well. I should also talk about your grenade. Your grenade is the Molotov, and the Molotovs are really, really strong. So the Molotov does, well, direct damage when you throw it. It'll go off immediately at any surface that it hits, but it can light yourself on fire. Unless, of course, you're max level with Firebug, and then that's not an issue. You can throw this directly at your feet, and honestly, even at lower levels, it's not an awful idea to throw it at your feet. Just try not to do it too often. It's a good way of getting yourself out of bad positions. If you get grabbed by a Zed, if there's a lot of little Zeds swarming you, and maybe you don't have any fuel left in your gun, you can throw a Molotov at your feet, and that usually works out pretty well. But some areas like this, you can actually just shoot the ground with your Spitfires, or your trench gun, or any gun that can start a floor fire. Against big Zeds, like Skrakes and Flesh Pounds, honestly, the Firebug is not the best at fighting them. They do have some strong weapons. The weapons that we're sadly not going to be talking about in this video. We will be talking about them in a later video, though. Those being like the Husk Cannon, the Microwave Gun, the Helios Rifle. All of those are very strong and do the job just fine. But these weapons, the Flamethrower, the Spitfire, even the Trench Gun to an extent, aren't the best at fighting off big Zeds. I should also answer the question of, should you buy armor with Firebug early? This one is honestly up to you. Firebug really doesn't need armor early on. They're not any tankier than any other class. They're actually one of the squishier classes, you know, on par with like Demo or Sharpshooter. They don't have any increased movement speed, but they do very, very high damage towards any sort of small Zed, so you can usually get away without buying armor and just buying a little bit of fuel for your cock and burn. That's honestly all you really need for the first maybe half the game. It's also not terrible if you die early on with Firebug, because you're likely not going to be losing all that much. Unlike certain other classes where obviously you don't want to die early on because you want to build up your money, Firebug really doesn't need all that much money to be good. They're a pretty strong class with just low amounts of money. Another thing that you can get early on is the Medic Pistol. Firebug works pretty well with the Medic Pistol, as it can fit into most of your loadouts without too much trouble. And the Medic Pistol is just really useful for your team. You know, always take the Medic Pistol if you can. It's a great weapon, especially if you find it on the ground. Then it's a really amazing weapon. Alright, now the second build for Firebug is a little bit different, but still pretty similar. So first up, we're going to go, once again, with high capacity fuel tanks. You could go with Bring the Heat if you'd like. Either one of these is fine for this build. Bring the Heat makes so you do a bit more damage. Fuel tanks give you a bit more, well, a larger magazine, which is nice. It's really your choice, though. There's no real wrong answer here at 5. At least for this build. At level 10, we're going to go with Barbecue, because this is using weapons that can't use the ground fire. You could still go with ground fire early on, though, to make the most use of the cock and burn, or if you're planning on getting a weapon like the Trench Gun or the dual Spitfires, you can still use that, no problem. And then once again, we are going with Shrapnel. Napalm is an option here. You could use it, but I feel like Shrapnel is generally better. If you're going to go beyond this, once again, level 20 with Heatwave is your best option here. It's really nice just to make Zed stumble back and be able to push yourself out of any sort of bad position. Firestorm really isn't that great, even with the weapons that it's specifically used on. And then at level 25, I would go with Pyromaniac. This is just so you have infinite ammo during Zed time, which is really, really good for this build. Alright, so the first weapon that I'd recommend for this loadout in particular would be the MAC-10. The MAC-10 is a fantastic little submachine gun. It does fire damage, it's pretty accurate, its sights are alright, it honestly doesn't have the best, but it does have a huge magazine with this loadout, holding 64 rounds and being pretty accurate overall. At only 900 dosh, it's a pretty good weapon and not that expensive. You can upgrade it, it scales alright with upgrades, but it's not necessary. And it's great at killing pretty much any of the small and medium Zeds because, well, fire's great at killing any of the small and medium Zeds, and submachine guns are also great at doing that. So, this one should be doubly good at that, right? And it sort of is. It's a great weapon. This build is a bit harder to use than the first build, simply because the first build doesn't require aiming. This does require aiming. Aiming for headshots is ideal with this. You can make it work though with body shots with certain weapons. Like, and if you weren't going to go with the MAC-10 and you were going to go with something like the trench gun, that's fine. It's a shotgun. It does enough damage to where body shots are generally effective against anything that's a medium or a small Zed. Maybe not the best against big Zeds. This build also is not that great against big Zeds. Scrakes and Flesh Pounds will still give you issues, because once again we're only looking at tier 3 and lower weapons so that people can afford it. There are some general do's and don'ts with Firebug. They're pretty basic though. The main thing you want to be doing with Firebug is killing small and medium stuff. Big stuff is best if you just ignore it, at least with these weapons that I'm recommending. Again, I will talk about the tier 4 weapons and stuff when we go over an advanced guide to Firebug. But things like Scrakes and Flesh Pounds really should not be high on your priority list unless you just don't have any other option. Mostly you should be looking to kill any sort of small and medium things, because one thing that Fire is also really good at doing is enraging big Zeds. And the last thing you want to do is get all of the Scrakes and Flesh Pounds enraged and come charging at your team and get your whole team killed. You also, at least with the first build, not so much with this build, but just keep this in mind with all Firebug builds, your fire can be distracting for your teammates. This is especially so for people like Sharpshooter, so be sure to keep in mind where your Sharpshooter is generally going to want to be looking at. Anything big, anything scary, they generally want to take that target out first. And if all of your flames are in the way, that can be very distracting for them. They might not be able to see the Zed, especially if they're looking in a scope. So really keep that in mind. Anyway, the second weapon I recommend in this loadout is the Hrg Incineratory Rifle. This is a great weapon as well. If you're familiar with the M16 with Commando, you should have no problem adjusting to this. It's exactly the same as the M16 in almost every way. It weighs the same, it has the same rate of fire, its secondary fire fires out fire grenades rather than explosive grenades. That's about the only difference. And you do fire damage, so you do damage over time. It's a great weapon, especially with the large capacity magazines. 60 rounds in this makes it very consistent at killing almost anything. It's a pretty good all-around weapon. Once again, this loadout functions similar to the other one, but this is more direct fire damage rather than AoE damage. Your main goal with this is to kill all the small and medium stuff as quickly as possible, and then let somebody on your team more capable, like a demo or sharpshooter, kill the big things. Once again, I know people are going to be saying, well, if you use the Husk Cannon or the Helios Rifle, you can kill big things. That is completely true, and we will go over that in the advanced guide for Firebug. But for right now, we're just going with the cheap options. Once again, like any of the weapons I recommend for these loadouts, they don't need upgrades. These weapons are pretty strong without upgrades. Their upgrades do scale them up okay. They don't scale like fantastically or anything, but they're not bad. So if you would like to upgrade these weapons, or if you get enough cash that you can upgrade these, feel free to. Alright, so that'll do it for Firebug. Firebug is honestly a pretty underappreciated class, in my opinion. It's a pretty good class for a lot of people. People that actually use this class pretty often know that it is quite strong, that it is quite good. It does take a little bit getting used to compared to other classes, because it doesn't necessarily function in the same way as them. It does do damage over time rather than a lot of initial damage, so some of their weapons can feel a little bit underpowered, and honestly Firebug does get much better the more you level them up, to where you become like immune to your own fire, practically immune to Zed fire. You're starting out with a bunch of ammo, so you don't have to worry about ammo early on. You got things like floor fires that just do so much damage to all sorts of small stuff. You can build up cash, and it's really not uncommon to have the most kills in a map as Firebug. They're usually the class that's most likely to get the most kills, unless maybe there's a SWAT or a commando or something on the team, or maybe a demo that's doing particularly well. Very good class, pretty easy to understand. Just kill all the small stuff, don't enrage the big stuff, and a lot of their weapons are pretty user-friendly because they just don't require very much accuracy needed. You don't necessarily need to hit headshots all the time with Firebug with most of their weapons, because damage over time will do its job. And certain weapons like the Flamethrower, Cock and Burn, Microwave Gun, you can just spray out and kill things. So they will be a very interesting class to come back to when we go through this on advanced guides, because I think Firebug changes quite a bit from a beginner's perspective to an advanced player's perspective. And especially when we eventually go on to talk about how to beat how to beat a board with each of these classes and whatever their, stronger or strongest loadouts might be. But we will save that for another time. Next time we're going to be talking about Gunslinger, which is a amazing class and one of my favorites. So that should be a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys found this at least somewhat entertaining or informative. And if you're new here, be sure that you're subscribed, so that way you get notifications whenever I put out new videos. Give this video a big old thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye!